Honorable Speaker and Honorable Senators, I wish to take you through this topic on marshalling of legislative business. No, it's okay. I got it. Now, marshalling of legislative business, Honorable Senators, is what kind of business you will transact on the floor of the House, when and how. So I'll summarize, because some of the explanations were given by the Speaker, by the Clerk. And taking you through this, I'll take you through the structure of sittings of the Senate, the legislative tools that you will use, and a bit on political parties, caucuses, and groups as related to how they help in the legislative process. So in terms of marshalling of business, the systems that you can use as a legislator, whether in the Senate or in the National Assembly or any legislative unit, is either through the plenary sittings, committee sittings, or if you are a leader through the political leadership within Parliament, there's a way you can impact on that marshalling, as well as the political caucuses and groups. The tools to be used, as indicated by the Clerk, are bills, statements, motions, petitions, papers, delegated legislation, which is a subsidiary legislation, the budget approval process, the audit and the other reports, as well as public appointments. These three, which are the budget process, the audit reports, and public appointments, will take the form of a motion in the end, but the processes in terms of the requirements are a bit different. So I thought to share with you these 8 tools so that you can understand what are the options you have. Now, analyzing the structure of the Senate sittings, I'll be sharing with you statistics on how it was, just to show you the peak time and off-peak time. This will really affect how you plan yourself for the next 5 years, when it is the peak moment and the off-peak time for the legislative calendar. As you very well know, the first sitting of the new Senate was held, and this is usually not more than 30 days after the date of the election. That is behind us. Regular sittings, I think that has been explained by the Clerk. I don't need to repeat myself. There's another sitting, framework of sitting, which is the special sittings. This one is usually requested by the majority or the minority leader with the support of 15 other members. And then we have a joint sittings. This joint sitting is something that is already coming up on 29th, when the President will be addressing Parliament pursuant to the Article 132 of the Constitution. And then we have other joint sittings when we have visiting head of states. This is on a need basis. It doesn't have every other time, as well as the committee sittings which are provided for in the standing orders. Now, in terms of the statistical data, just to put you in perspective, and I think you can see this on the screen, I have divided this into the 3 sitting frameworks, which are the regular sittings, joint sittings, and special sittings. And it shows you the 11th Parliament versus the 12th Parliament. The key highlight of these are the following. 1, the total sittings. You can see the number of sittings in 12th Parliament was 416. And you will ask the question, why? Because we had a COVID situation. I think that's the matter explained by the Clerk. Because of the virtual sittings, we held many other meetings. But the most other important highlight, Honorable Senators, you look at the percentage of each of the sessions from session 1 to 6, where was the largest part of the sittings. And this, you can see on the screen, is between session 2, session 3, and session 4. Of course, nothing happens in session 1, and very few sittings happen in session 5 and 6. The reason this is the peak time of any parliament across the world and even across the region is usually 2nd, 3rd, and the 4th sessions. This will help you to plan your legislative agenda. And I'll share in this as we proceed to the rest of the tools, that if you want to introduce a bill, and I'll be sharing some of the worst case scenario statistics, is you must plan your legislative agenda now. Because if it reaches the 5th session, the political parties, the self-preservation mode will kick in, and no member usually has time for these sittings and the legislative business. Now, the challenges we have so far had, of course, the issue of quorum, and I think that has been alluded to by the clerk, and the issue of virtual sitting. The recommendation to request you is the sponsors of business to avail themselves, because sometimes a business appears in the order paper every other day, and the sponsors are never available. The issue, of course, of hybrid sittings. Members sometimes log into the hybrid system, but they could be virtually present but not participating in the debate. That itself has posed a bit of challenge for the sittings. Now, in terms of legislative tools, I will start with the bills. Now, a bill is a proposal for a new law or a proposal to amend, which includes repealing an act of parliament or a provision in an existing statute. The sources that you can use as a member of parliament is, for instance, the executive. And I think this will request the leadership to very much engage the executive so that the executive's legislative proposals can be sent to the Senate. And this gives you a bit of a source. But at your own level as a legislator, you can make contact with the relevant departments and MDS in the executive. The other is the public, matter of public interest that you as a member, you may know. Committee inquiries, for instance, a committee may have done an inquiry in Naivasha or Nakuru for that matter, and you have seen a need that is bedeviling the public, and you can pick it up as a member. You can as well pick up on a resolution, say, by the House in form of a motion and change it into a legislative proposal. Petitions, for instance, that has came from the public. The academia, for instance, they have a lot of concerns and they have done researches, and we have a lot of good memorandum with the various institutions, which we will share as we proceed. The other source is non-state actors. The civil society organizations have various proposals, and I think as a member of parliament, that is a very good source for legislative input, as well as reports of constitutional commissions, devolution stakeholders, COG, county assembly forums, and lastly, the professional associations. I'm sure many of you belong to professional associations that have some input or proposals for legislative proposal. And this can either be sponsored by yourself, or you can sponsor it as a majority leader, or you can sponsor it as a member of a committee or on behalf of the committee itself. Now, the lawmaking process is a bit long. I don't want to go into much of the details, but starts with a legislative proposal, because you come up with a proposal to say, Mr. Speaker, I want to come up with this proposal. It could be anything. You give the wider concepts of the proposal. That is given to the Honorable Speaker for approval, who then marks to the clerk to look at the constitutionality, the legality of it, to conform to the existing statutes, if so. And then the Speaker approves it for pre-publication scrutiny. Now, this pre-publication scrutiny, the legislative proposal is given to the relevant committee, which then, that committee then will invite you, the relevant cabinet ministry or the department for that matter, and they look at it to understand the effect, the impact of that legislative proposal onto the republic and the citizenry. And then it goes for publication, and there's a publication period of 14 days. Now, during that publication period, the Speaker, under Article 110(3), is expected to seek concurrence with other Speaker, or in this case, the National Assembly, as to whether it affects counties, whether it's ordinary or a special bill. And of course, we had the challenges, which I will explain maybe in the next slides. And then it comes for first reading. Now, this first reading, it's only read by the clerk, the title of the bill, as well as the citation, and it ends there. Then after that, it goes for second reading. Now, this second reading, before it goes for the second reading, it is taken to the relevant committee for public participation. This is where now the public is invited to send memorandums and say their views about the bill. This helps you as a member to understand what is the level of understanding of the public, what is their input and their view on your legislative proposal, and then it goes for second reading. This second reading, you only discuss the general principles of the bill, and then it goes to number 8, which is a committee of the whole. Under the committee of the whole, this is where now the members now in form of a committee of the whole go through the bill clause by clause. And then the members will amend, if necessary, each of those clauses, and then as a sponsor, you'll be there to defend your position in the committee of the whole. And then, of course, it goes for third reading, referral to the National Assembly, but many a times, and this happens in bicameral parliament, is there's always a mediation process. This mediation is when the National Assembly says we do not agree that this bill is relevant and it has no any impact or effect to that regard. And then it goes for mediation process, which has a timeline of 30 days, and then presidential assent and publication. Now, the Senate bill is considered, just to put you into perspective, I thought to share this with you in terms of statistical data. And you could look at, the first Senate is the one of the 1964. It may not be relevant now, but second Senate and the third Senate. Now, in terms of sessions, that graphical representation gives you idea of when it was the most productive time. If you look at the third Senate, for instance, the fifth session, I think we had the highest number of throughput in terms of the number of bills at the rate of 50 bills per that session. But it gives you comparison to the second and the third Senate, just to give you the general perspective on the peak and off-peak time for the legislative business. Now, the number of bills assented to generally between the 11th Parliament and the 12th Parliament is as indicated, but the general and the most critical highlight here is during the 11th Parliament, the total was 90. But that total of 90 represented only 16.7% in terms of how many were assented to. And the 12th Parliament, out of the 148, only 20. The asterisk there on the 21. This other one is the one on the what is this one on the referendum, the one that was Clerk. The BBI, yes, sorry, I forgot the name, BBI, is why I'm adding that 21, because it was never assented to because of the decision of the court. So that gives you a 20 at the throughput rate of 14.2% only. So that shows you that you may introduce 1,000 number of bills, but the percentage looking at the history here ranges from 16 to 14%. Now, this analysis is very critical, honorable senators. How long does it take a bill to be passed into a law? And I've given you 3 scenarios. But on average, it does not take less than a year. And that shows you if you introduce a bill, once we start the ordinary sittings, which is now from 4th of October, it can take you 12 other more months to complete that cycle. And I've taken 3 examples, for instance. The County Government Amendment Bill has taken the least 273 days. But it's a worst case scenario. County Assembly's Powers and Privileges Bill, as well as the Mental Health Amendment Bill, they took 965 days and 474 days. The reason for this is there are a lot of bottlenecks in the legislative process. The Senate may pass a bill, but it takes long in the National Assembly. It may just be put on the shelf on the basis of it being construed as a money bill, or the National Assembly will just introduce a similar bill and forget the Senate bill. So this statistics shows that you may propose a legislative proposal But it can take 500 days, and that is almost 2 years. So the challenges arising out of this is for the leadership to assist in creating harmonious working relationship between the two houses so that the legislative business is not hampered in that way. Now, the opportunities available to come up with the bills, there are so many bills that lapsed in the last parliament. Those bills are there. They may have been owned by other members who may have not made it back to the Senate. You can adopt them and improve on the content. That is available. The Directorate of Legal Services is available to assist in that regard. You could also review existing legislations to align it to the Constitution. You could also co-sponsor bills in the National Assembly, though this framework has not been much utilized in the last parliament. The other is the legislative impact assessment, so that if you see the impact of a certain statute has been analyzed in a certain way, then you can use that impact to come up with a legislation. There's also sectoral proposals from Council of Governors, as well as proposals from County Assembly forums. There are also resolutions from conferences that propose legislative interventions, including the one we have here today. You can use that as a source to come up with a bill, as well as, of course, interactions with the KEPSA, media, and other future engagement with other professional groups. And also, your professional background also matters, because you may have a legislative agenda yourself as a person, in this case, as a senator. Now, the challenges we faced, of course, as I had indicated at the beginning, are unavailability of sponsors, lack of tabling of reports by committees, the delay to process bills by the National Assembly, similar bills by the National Assembly, as well as the lack of requisite numbers of senators at the time of a division. That itself has taken a lot of time to undertake. And of course, the off-peak seasons, generally, of parliaments and the Senate in that regard. Now, honorable senators, the other tool is statements. There are different types of statements. The general statements, which the timeline is 3 hours to the sitting. Your request to committees, for instance, if something has happened in your counties, and that is 24 hours to the sitting, you have to give that request to the Speaker for approval. Standing Order also 56 provides for the chairpersons of committees to give quarterly reports to the House on what the committee has done, as well as personal nature statements in form of personal nature, which is usually by leave of the House. Now, I want to go into the details of the guiding principles, the principles and the parameters that are used to approve or not to approve statements is provided for understanding Order 55, but because of the interest of time, I want to go into those details. But now, the statement sought, just to give you general statistical data, is that there was around 48% increase in the number of statements sought in the 12th Parliament. Compare it to the 11th Parliament, and that shows a rise in terms of number of statements. And I think this is because the honorable senators have understood their place in the Senate and the expectations from them. That is why the general throughput in terms of statements continues to increase. This data we will share a soft copy so that you're able to read it through. Now, the opportunities for you to come up with the statements lies mainly with emerging issues. There are emerging issues even as we sit here. Matters relating to international, regional, national, and county levels, because things arise and they emerge from day to day. And that is a good source for you to come up with a statement, as well as matters of general topical concern. Honorable Senators, the other tool is petitions. I've just shared with you the trend, as well as a chart on what happens with the petitions. Usually, if we receive a petition from a member of public, we have 7 days to review. And strictly that is in the standing orders. And then the next sitting day, the speaker or a senator on behalf of the petitioners is expected to present that petition. Now where we have a problem is the third cycle, because the moment the speaker or a senator presents that petition, it is referred to the relevant committee. Now this has been the weakest link, because the standing orders gives a timeline of 60 days. But the committees have taken, I think, even 9 months, 6 months, or even sometimes more than a year to bring back a report. And then the tabling is within 15 days, and then the institutions that are involved have 30 days in terms of implementation of that petition as tabled by the various committees. Now in terms of trends, that is the trends in terms of 11th Parliament and the 12th Parliament. Now in terms of the petitions that are admitted and reported, in 11th Parliament were 88, and the 12th Parliament was around 145. This shows 39% increase of the number of petitions. And that shows you, one, the way the public has an interest in terms of giving petitions and has trust in the Senate in terms of handling the petitions, but also the improvement by the Senate itself to undertake and to consider petitions. But around 21% have lapsed, unfortunately, by the time last Parliament came to an end. And if you look at, correspond that to 11th Parliament, was around 28%. I think, yeah, Honorable Speaker, that requires a lot of improvement as we undertake the legislative agenda going forward. Mainly the challenge, Honorable Senators, has been the lack of prioritization by committees. The other is the threshold. But this threshold, we are faced by the right of the member of the public to petition Parliament. That has been the challenge. Now, the next is the issue of petitions. There are all kinds of petitions. I won't go into the details. The normal petitions, procedural, and urgent matters of national importance. Now, this last one, urgent matters of national importance, are the motions where there's an urgent matter facing the public. For instance, the drought, or so many people have died in an accident, or there's a serious issue facing the Republic. And then 1 hour before the sitting, you request the Speaker to allow you so that the House can consider that bill, and the rest of the business is usually suspended for that regard. Now, the sources for coming up with the motions, Honorable Senators, this is where, number one, exist policy gaps. I know my time is up. Procedural matters, for instance. Functional assignments, for instance, where there is a gap between the functional assignments between the national and county governments, where there is an existing gap in terms of the national government obligation to the counties. There will be emergent issues, as well as the committee activities that may arise from time to time. In terms of the trend, that's where we are. There has been around 2% decline in the number of motions, if you look at the graphical representation there, between the 12th and the 11th Parliament, but that is a bit more of me. But Honorable Senators, the key highlight here is during the both parliamentary terms, the highest number of motions were filed during the second, third, and the fourth sessions. Now that answers what I had discussed in terms of the peak and the off-peak time of the sittings of the Senate, and that gives you projections on when you need to file motions. The rest, I think, is the papers laid. I want to go into the details. Messages, I think this is more of a straightforward. The number of total messages increased with the last Parliament compared to the 11th Parliament, as indicated. This we will share the soft copy. And then the other tool is delegated or subsidiary legislation. we had 84 statutory instruments compared to 16 in 11th Parliament. So that shows a bit of an improvement in that regard. The other tool is the budget process. I want to go into the details. This is where the House discusses budget policy statement, DORB, CARA, cash disbursement schedule. And just to show you the indication on the revenue allocation to counties. And this has come from 210 million in 2013 to 370 in 2022, 2023. And you can see the linear growth in terms of the allocation. And lastly, all what we say in terms of motions, bills, and petitions, as much as the, I think this is going down. The chair and the moderator are not happy, so I'll have to rush. It's done. Now, Honorable Senators, Honorable Speaker, the legislative tools we have discussed here, as much as they depend on the senators, the action, the agility, and the interest of the senators, it also depends on the support of the political parties or coalitions in that regard, on how they also help the legislative process. Because the political parties are the vehicles for representative democracy, and that's where the members belong. And that is where also the members in their various political groupings articulate their interests of the group. The legislative agenda of the majority and the minority party or the minority coalition will affect the level, the number, the speed in terms of the legislative process. Because if the minority leadership or the majority for that matter does not have a legislative agenda, then the statistics that we have given here will show a different finding in the end. So we will request and urge both sides of the coalitions to have a legislative agenda at the beginning so that the numbers can be different at the end of the term of Parliament. And in conclusion, it is very important, Honorable Senators, as the Clerk has also said, that you understand the standing orders in terms of how to facilitate you in terms of coming up with the legislative agenda. The robust legislative agenda stops with the member as an individual and with the leadership as well. However, this will be determined by the relationship between the two houses. Because we may pass 200 or 300 bills, but they don't go anywhere if they proceed to the National Assembly. So it also depends with the relationships between the two houses. These are areas of common convergence in terms of legislative partnerships that sometimes goes beyond the political parties' affiliations. And I think that point has been spoken to many times here during this week. And then we would like you to use the existing sources of legislative ideas so that you have a quick win and immediately so that you can have a legislative proposal that can push you to the next level. Thank you very much.